Okay, everyone. I finally finished this series. I have been reading it for years, and it is a 16-book series, though I hate clickbait stuff. So, to be completely honest, it is a Forgotten Realms series, and it in some way is the longest series in the Forgotten Realms. In some ways, it's not. I mean, because one, it's actually hardly a series, and then two, you have the Legend of Driss, which is just, I believe, 40, right around 40, but maybe it's 39 books or so. It's right around 40 books, and that's ridiculous. But that is broken up into several sub series. And it doesn't really feel like one series in a sense. Also, it sucks. But I know it's fighting words for a lot of people who like Drist, but I do not like it. But I'm a big Forgotten Realms fan. And so the series I am talking about, though, is this one. Let's see if I can hold it up. There's no way. I can't. It's on camera, though. You can see some of it right now. Get it? Get it all in here? Yeah, there we go. This is the series. I actually bought this all back in 2020, I think. So shortly after I started my quest and my blog, my Forgotten Realms reading blog, um, to read all Forgotten Realms books, and I bought this from one seller on eBay. This seller had all the books in the series. So, but I wanted to show you real quick the reading of this, and then I can kind of tell you actually how this works as a series. Um, so let me show you. So the first one I read was where is it? Crown of Fire, and I finished it on the 17th of August, 2022. And then the last one I read. So by the way, as you can tell in the series, that's number 9, right? And I'll go through these again individually here in a second. I'm going to take my stack apart. But I read Crown of Fire because of reasons of another series it is a part of, really, not even connected to, just part of. And the last one I finished was Finder's Bane on the 2nd of March, 2025. So almost 3 years. Took me about 2.5 years ish to read this. I'd say it's a little closer to 3 years, but it took a while to read. And now let's go through these individually and see kind of what they're about and how they're connected, though, as well. So we have the Parched Sea, number 1, which I finished on the 3rd of May in 2023. And I'll just switch to showing you guys the book right now. So the Parched Sea, by Troy Denning. It is about so they're all connected to Harpers, right? That's like the first thing that's immediately obvious. And often it's not like directly, right? It's either people who have their first interaction with the Harpers and they're getting recruited. It's people who actually are no longer part of the Harpers, and maybe they're doing something with the Harpers again for some reason. Stuff like that is a good chunk of the series. So this one is about a Bedouin, or sorry, it's a Bedouin. It's pretty same thing as a real life Bedouin. They call them the Bedouin. They live in the Anarak Desert, and her name is Ruha. She is considered a witch by her people, so she's an outcast. And thankfully, though, she has just been married off. Unfortunately, the hook on this one is that the tribe that she is now part of, and she's very happy with this change, because everyone in her own tribe hates her. They have a bad thing happen to them, like on her wedding night, pretty much. And so once again, she is kind of tossed to the wind. And So it does take place in the desert. It is very derivative in a lot of ways. Like I said, I mean, that's straight up, they're called the Bedouin, right? That's very obviously taken from the Bedouin. She has an encounter and an interaction with a Harper agent. I believe it's something. Oh, I don't even remember his name. It's been a minute. A lot of these books are kind of forgettable. Also, they hardly connect, right? So the Harpers, that organization, it's like kind of a semi-secret is what they're described as, because they're really not secretive. Organization that is out for as a force of good, right? If you watch the D&D movie, Ed Gein was a Harper, for example. If there is a book about him, and just strictly him speaking, because there is a book about him, but it's about the whole party. But if it was strictly speaking just about him and his connection with the Harpers, it would probably fit in the series if this series didn't end in the 90s. right? Because we can look that the first one was published in July 1991, and the last one was published in August 1998. So pretty much dominating the 90s. For the Forgotten Realms, you had the Harpers. Now, the thing with Ruha is that she has more books that she appears in. And so she appears in number 1 in the Harpers, and she appears in number 12 in the Harpers. So I'll talk about number 12 next. The Veiled Dragon. Actually, I like the cover on this one. This one has like her on her second Harper assignment as she kind of joins the Harpers at the very end of the first book. I guess that's a spoiler, but I mean, it's like pretty obvious. And this one takes her with the Shao embassy. And this is another reason I didn't really care for this one, because it has another analog. She is a part of an analog group, and then this isn't. The Shao are an analog. They're just Chinese. I just don't understand these fantasy analogs. I don't really care for them. The opening scene is really cool. Besides that, the novel is pretty forgettable. I think Ruha as a character is not a terrible character. I think when she's put in better circumstances, she has more of a chance to shine. In fact, Ruha is actually in another book. I've read her. I first encountered her in another series, and that is this book right here, Crucible: The Trial of Sirik the Mad, also by Troy Denning. It is a sequel to The Prince of Lies. It is the 5th Avatar book, and she is in it. She's also, I believe, I don't believe she's in all of them, but she is in the Return of the Archwizards trilogy by Troy Denning, which is the return of Netheril, Shadowvar, the Shade Enclave, to the Forgotten Realms, to Faerun, and I have not read those yet. And I have them somewhere buried on the shelf, but not easily accessible. I don't think, or else I would show you. But let me double check. No, those here. Okay. So she does go and have more adventures outside of the Harper series, right? So I read, again, the first one on the 3rd of May, 2023 is when I finished it. And the second one I finished on the 5th of June, 2023. So just a month later. And they're okay. Like I said, Troy Denning is a very, how do I say this nicely? Okay author. And so anyways, the second book in the Harper series is Elf Shadow by Elaine Cunningham. Okay. I read this on the 10th of February, 2020, so only about a year ago. Last year, in fact, I read this whole series because this one is strictly a series, actually. So, and almost all of them are the Harpers. So let me find the other parts of this series. So next you would have Elf Song, number 8 in the Harpers, also by Elaine Cunningham. And I'll talk more about the series together as a whole. And then after that, you would have Silver Shadows, number 13 in the series, also by Elaine Cunningham. And my worst, it has 2 stickers on the front. I apologize. It's the worst looking physically that I have in the series. And then we have Thornhold, 16. The last book in the Harpers is part of the series. And this series is called Songs and Swords. Okay. And it is actually more than 4 books long. So again, another one that goes beyond this. It has one more book. I have that one readily accessible. It is called The Dream Spheres, book 5 in Songs and Swords, but it's not part of the Harpers, right? It's not a book 17 or whatever. There was supposed to be more. I believe there's supposed to be like a more of a final, a conclusion to this. Really a duo in this series. You can see on Elf Shadow that almost certainly will never come out. It got canceled when 4th edition came out. Unfortunately, because this is a recent favorite of mine. Elaine Cunningham is a very talented author. I very much like how she makes the Forgotten Realms come to life. Her character work is exceptional. I think the way she draws upon elves and half-elves and humans in their interactions, and just the character of Arlen herself is really fun, and so is Danilo, right? So we have our main character, Arlen Moonblade, who's kind of described as an assassin, though I never see her assassinate anyone. So a little misleading, but she is related to elven royalty, but she's a half-elf herself. But she somehow famously has this elven artifact weapon, a moonblade, which no one else has ever heard of a moonblade excepting a half-elf as like a host, kind of like a tuning to it in a sense. So that's interesting. Danilo acts like a fop. He acts like a dandy and a fool, and is like a bad bard. And a bad magician, but in reality, he's an okay bard, and he's actually a really good magician. They actually have some adventures what's interesting about this series actually is that the adventures um, are often not together. So in the first book, it is. The second book, though, is pretty much strictly about Danilo. Again, book 8 in the Harpers. And then the Silver Shadows is pretty strictly about Arlen. And then Thornhold is pretty strictly about Danilo. And then, lovely enough, Dream Spheres, though again was not meant as an ending to the series, works beautifully as an ending to the series because they're back together, and I think it works really well. It goes exactly where I wanted it to go, at least. So that gets us from that first and 12th book in the Harpers, and then the second, 8th, 13th, and 16th book in the Harpers. And that's where we are done so far. I'll just read the publications for those real quick. Elf Shadow was released in October 1991. I finished on the 10th of February 2024. And then Elf Song, I finished on the 8th of April 2024. And then it was released in January of 1994. Silver Shadows, I finished on the 18th of May 2024. It was released in June 1996. And Thornhold, I finished on the 12th of August 2024 and was released in August of 1998. So again, the last of the Harper books. Then we have a standalone. There are plenty of standalones, so don't worry. The third Harper book, Red Magic by Gene Robb, I thought would be a lot more fun. The main character, like the heroes, are very not memorable. Right? There's, I believe, a centaur named like Winter or something. I really, again, not memorable. Really, they're not. There's a woman, there's a man, there's a centaur. That's pretty much it. They go against the Red Wizards. And Malagor, though, is the guy on the cover. Awesome art. Some of my favorite Forgotten Realms art. And he is also pretty unmemorable in some sense, besides the fact that it's just kind of cool because he's just a Red Wizard. And so I like that. He's still pretty cheesy and pretty like typical like villain, kind of cartoony, not very good, not well developed really. But so this book, I felt like could have been way cooler, or probably would have been way cooler to me if I had been much younger when I read it. But it is okay. I don't really have much to say on it besides the fact that if you want a book taking place in Thay, I mean, this is one, right? So I finished on the 24th of August of 2024, and I came out December of 1991. And then next we have another, essentially a standalone, actually. So we have The Night Parade by Scott Cianson. This one is a very much darker, more adult feeling in general. I finished it on the 16th of November 2024. It came out in June of 1992. Actually, I finished this one, and then I adopted The Night Parade as a faction into a one-shot for D&D that I ran right afterwards. I very much enjoyed it. It's just, it's interesting. So it's darker. There's really monstrous creatures and happenings. And Mirmeen Law here is the main character. She is known as the Lady of Arabelle in Cormyr, but she's actually from Calimshan, and this is about her going back to Calimshan and confronting the fact that her daughter, who she thought was dead from birth, is actually just turned up missing, and her husband kind of like got rid of her. So it is interesting. It is, again, it's also more sexual than, I mean, some Forgotten Realms novels around this time did get a bit more sexual, but not overtly so, but noticeably sexual in a like adult sense, I'd say. But it's an interesting one. Scott Cianson, I think, is an okay author. He wrote a few other Forgotten Realms novels that I've read, but it's not really connected to anything. I mean, maybe there's some other stuff that's like vaguely connected to Mirmeen Law as a character. Like I've read, what's that novel by Ed Greenwood called? It's a Spellstorm by Ed Greenwood, much more recent novel. Mirmeen is a character in that, but she's just one of those characters that just kind of pops up here and there anyways, right? So, and that is a fun novel. It is a nice short one. Again, mostly takes place in Calimshan and Calimport, specifically if you're looking for someone from that locale. And then next we have another standalone. This guy actually does pop up in 5th edition stuff. This is The Ring of Winter by James Lowder. I finished reading it on the 3rd of December 2024, and it came out in November of 1992. The Ring of Winter shows up in a 5th edition adventure, which is why this kind of comes up and plays a role. This takes place in Cholt, so if you like Cholt, I think Artis Simbar's character is pretty bland and lame. There's a short story about him as a youth in Realms of Valor, I believe. I'm not entirely sure, Besides that, there's nothing else about this character really, besides outside of those more recent adventure stuff. Um, but this book is okay. It is about the Ring of Winter. It's about Artis Cimber getting that Ring of Winter. So I mean, if you want to see the origin, if you really like playing like Storm King's Thunder or something in fifth edition, then maybe you would want to read this. So yeah, not bad. Again, standalone of the batch. And then we have another one. We have Crypt of the Shadow King by Mark Anthony. I read this one recently. So I finished this on the 1st of February of 2025. Came out in March of 1993. This one does have a sequel, only one sequel, and it is number 11 in the series. So we have number 6 and 11 in the Harpers. In number 11, I finished on the 11th of February, so only 10 days after the first one. And then it came out in November 1995. They are okay books. They're pretty straightforward fantasy. They follow a guy named Caladan Caldorian. He practices some like shadow magic, kind of as a bard, but he's really not much of a bard character. They do take place in Erebor, I believe, Erebor, but which doesn't get really a lot of attention. This is like east of Baldur's Gate and stuff. It's east of El Terrell, if I'm remembering correctly, specifically. So, and it does get into like some ancient history and like shadow magic. And if that's your thing, I feel like it does a good enough job. It's fun enough. They're really like pretty standard. There's really nothing special about them, but that's a lot of Forgotten Realms and D&D books in general. But I found them enjoyable enough. So, and nice maps of the area too, I feel like, especially in book 2, if I'm remembering correctly. Where is the map? Oh, I'm looking at book 1. That's why I couldn't find them. Right. Yeah, so like a nice map for book 2. So anyways, that is again book 6 and 11 in the Harpers. So far we've covered 1, 12, 2, 8, 13, 16, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11. So then we get to 7, which is another standalone. This is by David Cook, Soldiers of Ice. It is about a young Harper girl going north into a frozen area, I believe north of Damara, if I remember correctly, or Vasa maybe. I'm forgetting my geography right now, but it deals a lot with gnolls and gnomes and then like an ice fiend. That's pretty much all the focus you're going to get. There's also a paladin, kind of like a disgraced paladin of sorts, and then this young Harper. She's very young. In fact, I really like how it treats gnolls as, I mean, there's typically evil characters and evil species in general, but like in this case, actually has some nuance there, which I really appreciated. And I think it works pretty well. I finished this one recently as well, actually. So I finished it on the 8th of February, 2025. It came out in November 1993. And then we have number 9, Crown of Fire by Ed Greenwood. The only Ed Greenwood novel in the series, actually. It's a little thicker than some of the other ones. This is book 2 in a series, which is why I read this one earlier, or this was the first one I read, right? I finished it on 17th of August, 2022. Came out in April 1994. This is book 2 in the Chandril saga. The first book being Spellfire, the third one being, oh my, what is that third book called? Well, I can look right now. The third one being called Hand of Fire. That's right. And I read these all in 2022, and this is a fun series, but again, I wouldn't start here, right? So like if you wanted to read the Harpers through, you couldn't really start. But you got book 9, you'd actually have to go back and read another book that's not part of the Harpers. She has an interaction with the Harpers. It kind of joins the Harpers, which is why this book was included in it. It was going to get published around the same time. So I guess that was the thought process behind it. But there's not really much I can say about this one besides the fact that Chandril in book 1 realizes, after really, really bad experiences as trying to go adventuring, she realizes she has an insanely powerful, like, ability, kind of, and all hell breaks loose because people want it for themselves. But now we're almost done. Do not worry. We have number 10, kind of another standalone. It is a standalone in the Harpers itself, but is not a standalone novel, actually. So we have Kate Novak and Jeff Grubb, and it is a standalone novel, but it is also a sequel to a trilogy called the Finder Stone Trilogy, starting with Azure Bonds, followed by The Wyvern Spur, and then Song of the Sariels. I am a big fan of that series. This takes place 10 years later with three of those main characters from that series. And it is written by the same authors of that series as well. So this takes place in the city of Westgate. They're acting as Harper agents, essentially trying to figure out stuff. It's not bad. It was really nice to see these heroes again. I'm a big fan of Alias and Dragonbait. Not much I can say besides go and read Azure Bonds, really, if you want to read this one. So again, you get to book 10. If you get to book 9, you got to read one more book afterwards, and then when you finish 9, you need to read another book that's not part of the Harpers. You get to book 10, you need to read a whole trilogy before you actually read book 10. So and then book 14 is a character, it follows Storm Silverhand, a character that's very big in the Forgotten Realms. But you could really start here, I guess, if you really wanted to with her. Funnily, it's called Stormlight, right? Like, not the Stormlight Archive, though. Do not be confused. Also by Ed Greenwood, actually, I misspoke earlier. But this one came out in October 1996. I finished it 13th of March 2024. Very, very typical Ed Greenwood in a lot of ways. Lots of action, lots of combat, lots of people dying, getting immolated, whatnot. And it kind of gets old. Storm is naked like a good chunk of the book. It's just a lot going on. Really awesome Velez cover, though, which is cool. Probably the best cover for the whole series. So, yeah, you could read this one, though, when you hit 14. In fact, you could just read this one if you wanted to, just without the other ones. You've read Stormlight at home if you read Stormlight by Ed Greenwood. And then the last one I read, and the last one I'm going to talk about, is book number 15. So actually the before last one to come out, but came out in July 1997, whole year before the last book. I read it on the 2nd of March 2025. This is interesting because it kind of like Masquerades. It's pretty much a sequel to some of the other characters in the Finder's Stone trilogy, particularly Finder. And it's Finder's Bane in this case. It does have new characters. It's mostly following new characters, and it's fun, right? You don't really. I feel like there's less of a need to read the Finder's Stone trilogy to read this one. I would still read it because Finder's Stone trilogy really gives you a background on Finder, who is a god in this book, and you wouldn't really get that if you hadn't read Finder's Stone trilogy. So Joel follows Joel. He's a young priest. He's pretty much like the only priest of Finder. He's a very unpopular god, and he's on a pilgrimage to the Lost Vale, where the Sariels live and where the only temple to Finder is. And so, yeah, it's about that. It doesn't deal with Bane. Interestingly enough, so does Stormlight. Bane is a dead god at this point, and he does come back later, actually. So there's about a 10-year gap where he's a dead god, and that's how he's treated. Just like in there's some other books that deal with Bane as his dead entity, but again by Kate Novak and Jeff Grubb. This one is interestingly because it crosses over with some other campaign stuff. You have Spelljammer. There's a spelljamming ship, an Autoloid in this book, and it's pretty key to the book actually. And then you also go to Sigil. Sigil from Planescape is in this book as well. So I was like not expecting that. The only book in this series to really do that, to get out of the Forgotten Realms kind of thing. But very enjoyable. The thing that you get actually when you read this whole Harpers series is that you're getting a lot from the Forgotten Realms, right? You're getting stuff on the Dragonmere. You're getting stuff from like east of Baldur's Gate. You're getting stuff on the Sword Coast. You're getting stuff in the Heartlands, like Cormyr and the Dalelands. And you're getting stuff like over in Thay as well. You're getting Sholt. You're getting Kalimshan. So you're getting actually a good variety. You're even getting other things outside of those locales. So you're getting like your very typical ones, but also getting bits and pieces from other ones. So it is a good tour of the realms, and they're all about the Harpers in some sense. The Harpers also kind of leaves it. What's interesting is the Harpers are not necessarily always the good guys in these books. They are not necessarily the bad guys, but there's definitely the faults of the Harpers on display here, and it's interesting that just seems to have always been the case with the Harpers. That's not some like recent deconstruction of them. In fact, the series seems to end in some sense because one of the big guys leading the Harpers, Kelvin Arvinsson Blackstaff, leaves and he goes and forms, I believe, the Moonstars, right? And something like at that point, like, what are we going to do, right? So the Harpers still exist, of course. They needed their faction stuff for 5th edition, and so they're like kind of watered down Sword Coast based stuff, but still a very interesting series, I think. And overall, it's not much of a series, actually. I think that's pretty obvious, but enjoyable nonetheless. So, anyways, if you got any thoughts on this, I'm glad to have finally finished the biggest series in the Forgotten Realms, even though it's mostly just standalones. And now I will turn my attention and my focus elsewhere.